What if Max Verstappen didn't exist? Well, for the sake of this experiment, we're just gonna talk about the fact that he doesn't have a full-time drive and he's a reserve rather than a full-time driver. He's taking a break. He wants to do a DTM or Le Mans, what, for example, and he has just moved away from Red Bull as the main driver for a bit. Okay? What this basically does is it creates a wholly different scenario. Car 1 gets taken over Ricciardo, and for the sake of this entire experiment, I've also done so that nothing happens with our team, which is AlphaTauri. This team is gonna be the last. I'm gonna be retiring from every race in the season. We're just gonna look at what the drivers' championships will look like following the departure. How close will the rest of the teams be leading up to the end of the season? The season is 7 races long, just to make it so that it's not too long for this entire simulation to happen, but also we'll get to see a little bit of everything, a little bit of legacy tracks. What I like to do, we'll have Yas Marina. I mean, Abu Dhabi is gonna be the final race anyway. It's not gonna be that big of a deal. There's gonna be some of the fan favorite tracks, except for Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi, no one really cares about, I think. But as you can see, where is it? Scouting drivers. As you can see, he is a reserve. As you can see right here, he's a reserve. He's open negotiation with us. But that means that basically a lot of things can be done right. So, with 1, 2, 3, 4 drivers, these drivers are all so closely matched until signs that we could actually have a very competitive season. But we'll see. We'll see if that actually happens. So let's get into it. I'm going to show you guys the qualifying results, the race results. And that's only what you're going to see. You're not going to see what happens during the races. I might mention here and there things that happen in the races. But we'll focus on what happens at the top, what happens in the championships. Standings right now Standings right now are like this. There's nothing here. Max Verstappen will not be on here once everything gets started. As you can see, 23 drivers, because these 3 are the new drivers for the season. Couldn't really change any of that. But let's get into it. And let's look at the first qualifying session and what happens in the first qualifying session. And here we are with the qualifying session. Fernando Alonso takes pole by the very close margin. There is a tenth between the top 4. A tenth. That's what the difference was. A little more than a tenth, but from P1 to P4, that's incredible. The entire top 5 was within a second of each other. I mean, the entire top 10, the entire top 8 was within a second of pole. I mean, there was an amazing time set by Sergio Perez in Q1, which would have gotten him pole in Q3, but he couldn't manage the same lap time. But in the end, that was an incredible run. But Fernando Alonso, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez in P1, 2, 3. I mean, this is basically proving the fact that probably Red Bull is not the best car, even if it's the best car on the grid, the drivers don't match up. So it is in the hands of Max Verstappen, it is the Red Bull that is gonna be an absolute godly speed. But right now, it's looking like Fernando Alonso is the better driver overall. I mean, I just realized this, but Charles Leclerc and Fernando Alonso set the exact same lap time. But because Fernando Alonso set a lap time first, he got pole. This is a very close margin. This is like the levels of 1996 with Schumacher, Villeneuve, and who else was it? All set the same lap time. This is almost as close. This is incredible. The Ferrari and Aston Martin are exactly on par. They're both evenly the best drivers on the grid. It's great to see. Let's take a look at the race now. Race results. Let's see what happens. And I'll fill you guys in any developments during the race, in case there are some massive developments. And with the race having finished, there were some massive developments. Let's start from the top. Alonso, Leclerc, and Sainz, because of a mistake by Sainz, crashed each other out from the race, causing a red flag. This allowed the two Red Bull guys to pit and basically lead from that point onwards. Big stories, Alexander Albon was fighting with Lewis Hamilton for a podium, and he held on for most of the race after the red flag and held on to P4 15 seconds ahead of the other Mercedes of George Russell. The two McLarens crashed into each other because of a mistake by Oscar Piastri, so they are out. We as AlphaTauri, we decided that we're not going to do part of this race. We're going to be doing this season as a 9-team season, so just FYI. But we don't have to worry about that. Alpine made up positions. We had a total of 17. What was it? We had 5 DNFs of the 18 drivers. That's incredible stuff. I mean, Kevin Magnussen had a small tussle, got a 10-second time penalty. It's basically just finished nowhere. Other than that, the Williams guys got some massive points. The Constructors' Championship, it's Red Bull, Mercedes, Williams, and Alpine with 1 point adrift. Ferrari is in 9th after the first season. After the first race of the season, Daniel Ricciardo went on from P4 to win the race, but Sergio Perez got the fastest lap and P2. And with that, we have started the first of the season. This was some incredible racing, and that was the most eventful Australian Grand Prix I've seen in this game for a while. Let's get on to the qualifying session of the next race, which is I think the Austrian Grand Prix. And in the Austrian Grand Prix, the simulation, Charles Leclerc takes pole, and once again we have got two drivers with the exact same time, which is Daniel Ricciardo and Sergio Perez with the exact same time in Q3, with a 104.200. The entire top 9 was within 8/10 of pole, but from P2 downwards to P9 was 6/10. That is the closest margin in this entire season so far. It's only been 2 races, but still, that's a very small margin. But Austria always has the smallest qualifying margins. Leclerc was fastest in every part of qualifying by at least a 10th. I mean, in Q2, he was 2/10 quicker than he was in Q3, which is an insane lap time. Fernando Alonso was in P5. What was it? Alexander Albon just missed out on Q3 by about 3/10 to George Russell, it seems. No, to Lewis Hamilton, who set up 104.757, which was 4.5 tenths slower than his teammate, George Russell. The Mercedes is not looking that great, so let's see what they can do in the race. Leclerc seems to be the one to beat this season, but Ricciardo and Alonso are very close as well. And Sergio Perez as well. Just not forget that. Ricardo and Perez are P2 in the championship. Red Bull is leading the championship by a long shot. Ferrari needs a good race this time around after that double DNF in Australia. So let's get into that. Let's see what happens in the race. And with that, we had another insane race. For Ferrari, things went from bad to worse, with Carlos Sainz crashing into Leclerc, ending Leclerc's race, who was basically up for at least a podium this race. So that's a a second DNF in a row for Leclerc. This is putting his driver's championship in jeopardy. Perez went on to win. Sainz went on to recover after dropping to P5 briefly, and still made it on to P2. Perez looked untouchable until his teammate crashed into him, but still, the Red Bull is so much quicker that in the hands of Perez, he made it happen. Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon for Alpine used the opportunity to get a P3 and 4, bringing the Alpine into P2, into the fight with Mercedes, who had a very bad weekend, with 6 and 10 not telling the full story. Lewis getting a 10-second penalty, but still somehow managed to charge up the field to get P6. George just having the most uneventful race of the whole season thus far. Albon briefly running in P3, about a distance ahead of everyone else behind him. Alonso being an NPC for most of the race. Kevin Magnussen finishing P5 after a stellar stint, also running in P3 until he got overtaken by Carlos Sainz, and then he fell down the field with 2 laps to go, allowing Gasly and Ocon to overtake him at the very end with the tire wear just kicking in. The 2 and the 3 stoppers were by far the best strategy, but Pierre Gasly going from P13 to P3 in a race with a 1 stop was an incredible run. The VSC caused by the crash out of Leclerc helping him, getting a pit stop, making the strides that were needed for this race. Danny Ricciardo, after crashing into Sergio Perez, absolutely getting demolished, possibly suffering some major floor damage, causing him to only finish P7. Still some decent points, holding on to the lead for Red Bull with 31 points added to the total, 75 points. The distance is pretty big, but Alpine, Mercedes, Ferrari, Williams are all up there for some massive points. McLaren having an off day as well. Aston Martin looking super strong, but not having any returns for their incredible performances in qualifying. Where Williams struggling in qualifying, but absolutely doing bits in the race. Sergio Perez, Danny Ricciardo are the closest rivals. Red Bulls are basically fighting this on their own, but don't count Lewis Hamilton out. He is up there. Esteban Ocon has thrusted himself into at least the fight for P2, if not more. Carlos Sainz is also into the fight. Pierre Gasly is in the fight. The 2 Alpine guys are possibly the closest to each other. Alexander Albon, can we just say, the Williams in the hands of Alex Albon is an absolute rocket ship. The amount of points he's gotten this far does not reflect what he could achieve here. Let's get on to the next race, which I believe is Monaco. I'm not sure just yet. That's a pit stop. We're not even taking a look at that, but if you're interested, here they are. Overall, Red Bull is the fastest. Ferrari doing a great job. Williams doing a great job as well. Haas, nowhere to be seen. Mercedes also doing pretty decent. All teams are doing very decent stuff. But let's get into the next race, which is I think Monaco. And I was wrong. It's British Grand Prix. It's Silverstone, and Perez in qualifying was by far the quickest driver in every session. He was 2 tenths ahead of Leclerc. Leclerc and Sainz are possibly the quality specialists thus far. Alonso not doing too bad, and the times just went down pretty quickly. It started a little bit wet in Q1, but it went on to become completely dry for Q3, Q2, and ending of Q1 as well. So you did see some 30s briefly here. Our drivers, I just let them do simulation because, as you can see, no upgrades means about 2 seconds down the road from the next fastest car. But it's 2x2x2 in the top 6 with Red Bull, Ferrari, and Aston Martin. Nico Hülkenberg still being the quality merchant that he is, but crucially, George Russell got knocked out in Q2 by just under a tenth. Not too big of a gap there, but it was 3 tenths. Sorry, it was 3 tenths. Not too bad, but it's a big thing. But both Haas's are into Q3, which is something that's probably good for their confidence overall. But let's get into the race. Let's see what happens in the race. And the race went great for Perez, honestly. But this was the most uneventful race that we have had thus far, with Sergio Perez winning by a pretty decent margin, actually. Not as much as Austria, but it was a great margin to win by. And Leclerc bouncing back somewhat, getting points on the board finally. Fernando Alonso, again, the 2x2x2 was held up. Nico Hülkenberg finishing 8th in the Haas. Kevin Magnussen finishing 10th. The Haas is starting to find the Mercedes a little bit for the bottom of the points. Aston Martin is just a little too far ahead. Lance Stroll somehow managed to squeeze his way from 15th on the grid at one point to P6. There was no real change except for the fact that Carlos Sainz seems to be on pace in this particular alternative universe, but it's looking pretty decent. Sergio Perez is 19 points, 69 points by the way, nice. 19 points ahead of Ricciardo, who did get the fastest lap, so he did get the benefit here, but it's good to see everything that's going on. Constructors, Ferrari has closed the gap into P2, but Alpine is still close enough. Even Aston Martin, with their 18-point gain, has made it happen. Red Bull seems to be running away with it with 2 drivers who are pretty decent drivers there. And Williams is starting to drop off, but they still have P5 in their sights for the season, potentially. P4 is an option still, with a decent point gain at some point, but it's Alpine with no points, Williams with no points. The rest of the team's getting some decent points. Looking like a very promising season thus far. Can we get 3 different winners in 4 races? Is that possible? Let's see what we can do with the next qualifying session coming up. With the wet Belgian Grand Prix qualifying, Sergio Perez was once again at the top, but Leclerc didn't squeeze in a P1 in Q1, but he's now P2 in Q2, Carlos Sainz in P3, Daniel Ricciardo in P4, Nico Hülkenberg in P7 again, Esteban Ocon trying to make do with the struggles he had in previous race. Up in P6, the Mercedes still looking like the 5th, 6th fastest car overall, with just 2 very good drivers in their hands. McLaren is absolutely nowhere, which is just sad to see. We are, as an AlphaTauri, is just irrelevant for this entire save. I don't know. I don't even know why I scrolled that far down. But this is where we're looking at. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what Williams can do. Can Williams bounce back? Can Lance Stroll, who got knocked out in Q2, make it past the field in a dry race? And we have another different race winner. I swear to God, this is not scripted at all. But we've got a new race winner in this save now, and it's Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc, after having a double DNF in the first 2 races of the season, has picked it up with a P4 and a P1 now. He wins the Belgian Grand Prix with Perez, as you can see, not on the first page. Perez had an absolute stinker, a massive crash into turn 7, causing him to drop down the order, then a lockup into turn 1 after a safety car caused by Pierre Gasly crashing out meant that he was out, and then Lando Norris, for good measure, crashed into him a little bit. No damage for Perez, it seemed, at least in the replays, but that just made his race go from bad to worse. He went from P1 to P15, 0 points to show for his efforts. Danny Ricciardo hopping onto the podium. The Ferrari seem to have brought upgrades for this race, which just mean that they just catapulted themselves into the championship fight to a certain extent. They're 40 points off, 44 points off of Red Bull, which is the exact amount of points they got just this race. Literally, this couldn't go better for the Ferrari. If they can replicate this once again, we have a championship fight going to the last 2 races of the season. Just FYI. That's something that we can actually do, because just don't forget, there's 3 races left for this season to finish, and it seems like this could be anyone taking the top P3 can be literally anyone. There's 18 points going from P6 to P3. Even Williams, with a great race, with an incredible underdog race, could get somewhere. Hulkenberg gets P6. Lance Stroll. Okay, when we looked at qualifying, I said, can Lance Stroll make progress? Well, Lance Stroll has finished P6, I think the 3rd time in a row this season. That's incredible. The time difference is pretty slim, but Leclerc was just in a league of his own. He's led from start to finish, more or less, which is incredible. Russell, after the safety car, had a very questionable strategy. He was on 67% softs when everyone else around him was on brand new softs. So that was just a very weird strategy by Mercedes to put Russell on that particular tire. But it seems they got some points out of it. Mercedes still barely holding on to P3. Alpine is also barely close enough. Aston Martin showed some improvement there, consistency. And let's see what all 3 teams can do in the upcoming races. And if you want to see more of this, you want to see me, for example, remove Red Bull from the equation, we can try. We can see what happens when the Red Bull gets out of the way. If you want to see more of these kind of experiments of what happens if, I'll call it the What If series. Not like the Marvel What If series, but just, let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you want to see more. And comment for engagement. Because commenting means people like it more, it seems. But let's get into the next 3 races. Let's see what these drivers can do. What is the entire championship going to look like at the end of this? Because there is 4 points between Sergio Perez and Danny Ricciardo. But even Sainz can win this championship. Leclerc is close, but it seems like 32 points is a little much. But if Sergio Perez if the 2 Red Bulls don't score any points next race, this could literally be anyone's championship. Even Lewis Hamilton, with his consistency, could get some points. get the championship here, or get his 8th title. You never know. Let's take a look at what happens next year. And we have a different pole sitter for the Japanese Grand Prix, the first of the final 3 races of the season. And for the first time this entire season, we have 3 different drivers topping Q1, Q2, and Q3. In Q1, it was Leclerc from Carlos Sainz, and Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez were there up there as well, it seems. Q2, it was Sergio Perez from Leclerc. Or was it? No, from Danny Ricciardo and Leclerc and Sainz. But then in Q3, Sainz turned up and went to the top at the time, which is pretty great. From Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc, and Danny Ricciardo. The insane thing here, Fernando Alonso, P5, for the 4th race in a row. Another aspect we need to look at is Alexander Albon into Q3 this season, this time around. Lance Stroll starting in P12 yet again, out in Q2. The Haas guys out in Q2 for the first time in, I think, 2 races. I mean, the McLaren making it in at some point at this time around. It's looking like the Ferrari has turned up, and Sainz might actually stake claim to the championship here. Let's take a look at the results of the race now. There is some rain forecast, so let's see what. And this was another eventful race. I swear to God, these races are possibly the most exciting races you would ever have seen had I actually participated in them. We had a lap 1, turn 1 red flag, where Ricciardo outbroke himself, crashed into Fernando Alonso, who crashed into Pierre Gasly, ending Fernando Alonso and Pierre Gasly's race on turn 1. That's it. Game over. Ricciardo had massive damage, so his race was over, basically. He was running, but he got lapped. This helped put George Russell into the podium positions. Then we had another red flag at some point, caused by a spin by George Russell. That red flag didn't cause any crashes, didn't cause any damage, but somehow led to a massive rush for the rain. The rain hit, and then you had a moment where the Mercedes and the Haas's didn't pit. Why? Because briefly it became dry again. Long enough for there to be a Mercedes, Haas, and Mercedes podium. Yeah, that's right. Then the rain did get worse and they all pit, but Russell came out on top with an incredible pit stop and held on to P2 for the whole race. What this means is that Russell jumps up for contention. Daniel Ricciardo getting no points meant that Carlos Sainz did get some points, and then you've got Leclerc winning the race, making it so that literally there is a very small margin. There is 22 points from P4 to P1. There's 22 points between P1 and P2, and there is 4 points separating P2 to P4. And if you want to put Lewis Hamilton in there as well, Lewis Hamilton could mathematically still win the championship. Even George Russell could mathematically still win the championship. Mathematically. Because with 2 races to go, that is 52 points to take. That would put him 2 points ahead of Charles Leclerc. Sorry, no. That would put him 3 points ahead of Sergio Perez at this moment. So next race decides if George Russell still has it in him to win the championship. That's right. the top 6 drivers can still mathematically win the championship. And for the penultimate qualifying session of the season, we had a very sparse grid. Alright, this is a very weird grid. Fernando Alonso, for some reason, was in the fight at some point, but like there is a very weird thing going on right now. There is Sergio Perez taking pole, but he did not lead any practice session. He did not lead any Q1 or Q2 session right at any moment. Daniel Ricciardo finished P1 in Q1. Carlos Sainz finished P1 in Q2. So it looked like they were going to be the ones for the championship, but for the run for pole. But then Sergio Perez turned up and pulled half a second on the rest of the grid somehow in Q3, which just meant Sergio Perez is in it to win it. He is here to stay, and he wants that championship now. His confidence is up through the roof, I think. But Daniel Ricciardo, don't count him out. Sergio Perez wants to wrap up this championship this race. He can. He can do it. With a race win this time around, he can wrap up the championship. But that really depends on who gets P2. If it's his closest rival, then he might have to do it in the final race as well. But if it's not him, it's over. Let's see what happens in the race, though. And we have set it up. Not on purpose. We didn't do anything. I promise you this. But Charles Leclerc wins yet again. Carlos Sainz gets P2 yet again. Fernando Alonso returns to the podium. Sergio Perez drops to P4. Lewis Hamilton makes it up to P5. And Daniel Ricciardo barely misses out on P5 and ends up in P6. But the storylines going to the final race of the season, it's the person to win the race wins the championship. As long as it is someone from Red Bull or Ferrari. Why? Because Sergio Perez leads by 10 points over Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz is 13 points back. Charles Leclerc is 10 points back. Daniel Ricciardo is 24 points back. This is a 4-way championship fight. Sergio Perez needs to finish within 4 points of his teammate to win over his teammate, but needs to finish ahead of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz to win the championship. This basically means whoever wins the race, and as long as Sergio Perez doesn't finish in P2, wins the championship. No, even then, actually. That's 6 points different. 8. That's... Yeah. This is literally winner takes it all. At the moment. Winner takes it all. 4 drivers, 2 teams, Constructors' Championship. Ferrari leads the championship by a single point over Red Bull. Yeah, that's right. Max Verstappen has this drastic of an effect on the championship going to the final race of the season. Let's not forget, Charles Leclerc had double DNF going into the 3rd race of the season. Charles Leclerc was in the bottom of the championship. He was the very bottom. Okay? This means only one thing. If Charles Leclerc can win the championship, he will have done it against all odds. Daniel Ricciardo would have done it against all odds. Carlos Sainz would have done it against all odds. Sergio Perez arguably needed to win this with 4 podiums, 2 race wins, and 3 pole positions. He should have won this. He should have had this championship wrapped up 2 races ago. But struggles have continued, and he is now just mathematically ahead. But can he win it? Only time will tell. Or at least only a few seconds will tell. Let's go into qualifying for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.